Hi there. Welcome to Skysetter Designs Technique Demonstration, and I'm going to jump right in. The first technique that we're looking at is, of course, loading your brush. And when we dip our brush into the water, let me pull that over a little bit closer. There we go. When we dip our brush into the water, we think that our brush is loaded, and it's actually usually overloaded. So what I do is I will tap it on a paper towel. I will also wipe it on the edge and tap. It just depends on what I'm doing. The first thing that technique that I'm going to show is a tea consistency of paint. And I'm going to grab some Hooker's green or Prussian green. And I'm going to create a tea consistency. And tea consistency is usually, it doesn't have to do with the pigment strength. It has to more do with the consistency of the paint. I'll learn to speak someday. First day with new tongue, apparently. So when you run a brush through a tea consistency, first off, you can see the plate through there. Second off, it usually comes back together and creates a puddle very quickly. So we're going to throw our tea consistency right here. The next one is a honey consistency, or not a honey. Hello, it's a cream consistency. Here we go. A cream consistency is a paint where you can't see through it, but you can brush through it and it moves quite easily, and it goes back together very slowly. So it's about 50% pigment, 50% water, and much more vibrant. And the third consistency that I work with is honey. And that is 80% pigment and 20% water. It is very thick. When you move it on the palette, it does not move back together quickly at all. You cannot see the palette through the pigment, and it creates a very dark or a full color of your watercolor. Is it wrong to use your watercolor at full strength? No, it's not wrong. There are times when you want to create a number of things. Let's say a picket fence or a row of pickets, and you want that to be extremely dark. You might use a honey consistency to get there. Okay? Next thing we're going to do is wet on dry, which is what we've just done here. But again, wet on dry is where you take wet paint and put it on dry paper. And the next thing is wet on wet. When we do wet on wet, we usually wet the area first. Okay? And when we wet that area, we don't want big puddles of water. We just want it to glisten. I don't know if you can see that there's a huge puddle of water here. So I'm going to pick a little bit of that up with my brush. I just, again, want that watery area to glisten. And I've tinted it with the green paint so that you can see where I put the water. But this is closer to a glisten. Hope you can see that. And then you would add pigment in there. So usually when you add wet on wet, that pigment will move or run. So I'm doing something called dropping in color right now. And you can also do color mixing with dropping in color. So I'm going to grab some of this yellow here, and I'm going to drop in that yellow over here. And I'm going to allow it to mix all by itself. I'm not going to mess with it. And that's called wet on wet and color mixing on paper. Next thing we're going to do is a wash. So a wash is usually done with a tea or a cream consistency, and it is not always easy to do the first few times you do it. What you're trying to do is keep a consistent amount of water and pigment throughout the entire wash. You usually start at the top of an area that you're working on. Let me make sure that this is all back in frame. Okay, so I'm going to start here at the top, and just like spray painting, I'm going to do my next stroke halfway over the top and into its own line and keep going down. And when I see that it's not going all the way into the valleys of cold pressed paper, I will pick up new pigment, not much, and I will continue my road down until I've created a wash. If you go back into that wash, you're going to do something that's called blooms or runs. So washes are one and done. If you have to redo a wash, you're going to go back in and redo it from top to bottom. So here we go. I'll show you what happens when I go, oh gosh, I need to correct this little bit here. If I have to correct that and I've picked up new pigment, what I'm doing is I'm introducing new water into that area, and it is now blooming or spreading out. And if you're on YouTube, you can zoom in and see that bloom and spread out. I apologize that I don't do videos. I create painting kits. I'm not that person. I'm an artist for the most part. Anyway, so you can create blooms. If you add more pigment into an area that's drying, you can create a run. And that will also separate out eventually. The more you leave it alone, the more it separates out and turns into something interesting. You can create dots in that bloom and run, and all sorts of things with it. You can use it to your advantage. It is not a mistake to make a bloom or run, but if you were trying to create a solid, clean wash, you can actually just go ahead and re-wet the whole thing. It's going to make it a little lighter than it was before, right? But I've made a new clean wash there. The next one is lifting with a brush, and I'm going to use magenta because we need new color on the page. I like color. All right, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to scumble wash. That's what I call this. I scumble. And I basically liken it to scrubbing a pot with my brush. And what it does is it creates texture in my wash. It creates areas that have more pigment and less pigment, more water and less water, and therefore it does not dry evenly like a regular wash. When I go to lift with my brush, I go ahead and rinse it real good. I will dab it off a number of times, or I will go ahead and actually squeeze out the water, and then I'll take a dry brush and I will lift. And that can be used in a number of things. You saw how I did the fence post here? Well, guess what? I can do fence posts the opposite way, negative. And every time I lift, I wipe that pigment back down so that I'm not reapplying the pigment. And that is lifting with a brush. The next one is lifting with a tissue, So I'll go ahead and do that. And I'm just gonna scumble in. Again, my favorite wash is scumbled. Not something I put on the sheet, but something you will only see here and maybe from other artists who provide a technique video. So there we go. I've created a wash, and I'll take a Kleenex or tissue and I will roll it up. I'm not going to roll it up too tight. And think about it. See all of these marks in this tissue? all of the ridges and wrinkles and lines. Well, guess what? When I do this, and I'm not tapping hard, it's going to create all of those wrinkles and lines and ridges on my paper. I can also use a cotton bud or Q-tip or whatever you want to call this and create dots. I can pull lines with it. So I can use it just an FYI. If it is dried too much, you can't lift anymore. You would have to re-wet that area. Let's see if I can get it to work. This might be permanent magenta that I have here. Let it activate for just a moment and then pull a couple times and it will pull that off. So you can actually correct things that you've done by lifting also. If you put too much pigment somewhere, or if it's gone somewhere you don't like, you can lift. When you're painting anything, if you come with a wet color next to a dry color, or next to a drying color, that wet color is going to run right into that drying color. So usually when we paint flowers, we will create that petal and create this petal, but we won't paint in that petal until these two are dry. Bonus. All right, soft edges. Let's do soft edges with a purple pigment. So I'm just going to throw some blue in here and I'm going to create a darker blue. No, I'm actually going to create purple. I'm going to throw some magenta in there. These are cheap little plates that I got at Walmart for $1.12, and they are awesome. Paint puddles on them perfectly. They don't run into each other. They don't bead up. I like it. All right, so I'm going to create a soft edge, and I usually it's easier to create a soft edge when you're running a tea or a cream consistency paint. This is closer to a cream consistency. And I'm just going to throw that paint on there. Again, I'm going to scumble a bit. That's my style. Oop. I'm going to throw my paintbrush around. Y'all don't mind, do you? Okay. So now I'm going to wet my brush. I'm going to dab it a couple times on my paper. And when you go to do soft edges, you come from the outside in. You don't go from the inside out. So I'm going to, and more perpendicular. Your brush is closer to the same plane that your paper is on. And I'm going to run that over here. And I'm going to wipe a couple times. And it is going to remove that hard edge and create just a nice soft edge there. This and washes take some practice, and if you have too much water, it's going to create a bloom back. So, you know, again, it takes some practice to do this, and of course you can draw this paint out further out and keep creating it until it's pretty much gone. So can you think of where that would be used? Would that be used on the petal of a flower to create the lighter edge and leaving the darker bit in the middle? Let's see here. Could you pull a line through there? Just a little line? All sorts of things you can do when you soften an edge. Okay, the next one is dry brushing, and you can load your brush with any consistency of paint, but it's going to be easier with a cream or a honey consistency. So I'm going to grab this purple again, and I'm going to go ahead and load my brush. I'm going to tap it once, taking some of that pigment off. And then I'm just going to lightly kiss the paper. All I'm trying to do when I dry brush is put paint on the higher ridges of that paper and not put pigment down in the concaves or the valleys of the paper. And I use this for water, to do the highlights on water. And of course you won't want it all to be dry brushed when you do that. You only want some of the water glistening here and there. You can use it so many different ways. I can't even tell you right now. Anyway, that's it for my quick techniques class. Thank you so much for getting a Skysetter Designs watercolor kit. And have fun.